I was 67 years old when my son-in-law grabbed the microphone at my daughter's wedding and destroyed what should have been the proudest moment of my life. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice echoing through the ballroom speakers, "I want to thank this desperate old man right here. He paid for everything, all $400,000, because he's so lonely and pathetic he'd do anything to feel important." The crowd's laughter felt like physical blows. My daughter, my only child Sarah, the little girl I raised alone after her mother died, she wasn't defending me. She was laughing too, champagne glass in hand, her white wedding dress suddenly looking like a stranger's costume. Before we continue, if you've ever felt invisible to the people you sacrificed everything for, if you've ever been publicly humiliated by your own family, leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, because this story will show you exactly how dignity can become the deadliest weapon of all. My name is Robert Wilson. I'm not a wealthy businessman or a powerful executive. I'm just a construction contractor who spent 40 years building other people's dreams with these calloused hands. Every dollar I earned was honest. Every sacrifice I made was for my daughter. After losing my wife Maria to cancer when Sarah was just 10, I became both mother and father. I worked double shifts, lived in a small apartment, drove old cars, but I made sure Sarah had everything. Private school, dance lessons, summer camps, college without debt. I thought that meant something. I thought love given freely would be valued, not mocked. What my daughter and her new husband didn't know that night, as they laughed at the desperate old man, was that I had one final card to play. You see, that morning I had written a check for their dream house, $420,000 for the perfect home in the perfect neighborhood. The check was sitting in my jacket pocket during that speech, during that laughter, during my silent walk out of that ballroom. And as I drove home alone that night, I made a decision that would teach them the true cost of disrespect. Now my phone shows 80 missed calls. Now they understand that mockery has consequences. Now they're about to learn that sometimes, the deepest cuts come from the quietest blades. But to understand how we reached this moment of cruel laughter and cold revenge, we need to go back. Back to the day I first met the man who would teach my daughter to laugh at love itself. I built my first house when I was 23 years old. It wasn't much, just a small 2-bedroom project on the edge of town, but Maria was there with me every weekend, bringing cold lemonade and wearing her favorite yellow sundress. She believed in me when no one else did. "Robert," she would say, her dark eyes shining with pride, "one day everyone will know what these hands can create." She was right. Over 40 years, Wilson Construction grew from that single project into a respected local business. Not huge, not fancy, but honest work that let me hold my head high. One memory stands out clearer than all others. It was Sarah's 7th birthday, just months before Maria got sick. I had spent 3 weeks secretly building Sarah a dollhouse in our garage after work. Every tiny shingle, every miniature window frame, crafted with the same care I put into real homes. The morning of her birthday, Maria blindfolded Sarah and led her to the garage. I can still hear Sarah's gasp of pure joy when the blindfold came off. "Daddy, it looks just like our house." She threw her arms around my neck, not minding the sawdust on my clothes. Maria took a photo of that moment, Sarah in her pink pajamas, me in my work shirt, both of us grinning like we had all the happiness in the world. That photo still sits on my bedside table, though the colors have faded over the years. We didn't know then that Maria's constant tiredness wasn't just from working at the hospital. By Christmas, the doctors found the cancer. It was aggressive, spreading faster than anyone expected. Sarah didn't understand why mommy couldn't play anymore, why she was always in bed. I would sit beside Maria after Sarah was asleep, holding her thin hand, promising to take care of our little girl. "Just love her enough for both of us," Maria whispered the night before she left us. Sarah was 10, too young to lose her mother. I was 38, too young to lose my heart. The years that followed were a dance of work and parenting. I learned to braid Sarah's hair for school, though my rough contractor's fingers never got it quite right. I packed lunches, attended parent-teacher conferences, and sat through every dance recital. The other parents would give me sympathetic looks, the widowed father trying his best. But Sarah was my purpose. Every house I built, every contract I completed, was another step toward giving her the future Maria would have wanted. Loneliness became my quiet companion. Friends tried to set me up on dates, but my heart stayed closed. How could I explain that I still set 2 coffee cups on the counter each morning out of habit? That I still turned to share news with someone who wasn't there? Instead, I poured everything into Sarah and my work. I watched my daughter grow into a beautiful young woman, graduate college, start her career in marketing. My pride in her success filled some of the empty spaces Maria left behind. Life settled into a comfortable routine. Weekdays were for work, meeting clients, supervising job sites, teaching younger contractors the right way to build a foundation that would last generations. Weekends were for maintenance around my small house, Sunday calls with Sarah, and occasional fishing trips with my old friend Tom, who'd been my first employee back when Wilson Construction was just a dream. It wasn't an exciting life, but it was mine, built with the same careful attention to detail I put into every house. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in March, Sarah called me. Her voice was bubbling with excitement. "Daddy, I met someone special. His name is James Anderson. He's a financial advisor at Sterling Partners. Can we come over for dinner this weekend? I really want you to meet him." Something in her tone reminded me of Maria, that same brightness, that certainty that life was about to change for the better. How could I say no? I didn't know then that I was about to meet the man who would teach me that sometimes, the most dangerous demolition comes from within the family itself. James Anderson arrived at my house that Saturday evening in a black Mercedes that looked too expensive for a young financial advisor. He stepped out wearing a suit that probably cost more than I made in a month, his smile as polished as his Italian leather shoes. Sarah introduced us on my front porch, and I noticed how she seemed smaller next to him, like a bird trying to match a peacock's strut. "Mr. Wilson," he said, gripping my hand too firmly, "Sarah has told me so much about you. A self-made man, that's so admirable in today's world." Something about the way he said, self-made, made it sound like a polite insult, but I pushed that thought aside. This was Sarah's special someone. I had to try. I had spent all afternoon preparing Maria's old lasagna recipe, setting the table with our best dishes, the ones we usually saved for Christmas. James praised everything extensively, his words smooth as honey. "This house has such character," he commented, looking around my modest living room. "Sarah mentioned you built it yourself? It must have been quite the investment back then." The question about money came so naturally I almost missed it. Sarah jumped in before I could answer. "Daddy built most of it with his own hands, James. He's the best contractor in town." But James was already asking about property values in the neighborhood, about my other real estate holdings, about my retirement plans. Each question felt like a gentle probe, testing for weak spots. The changes in Sarah started small, but they were there. The next time she visited, she was wearing designer clothes I knew she couldn't afford on her marketing salary. "James says presentation is everything, Daddy," she explained, brushing lint off her new silk blouse. She started talking about moving to a better part of town, about the importance of social connections, about James's vision for their future. "He says with his financial expertise and the right investments, we could really build something amazing." My daughter, who once loved helping me in my workshop, now wrinkled her nose at the sawdust on my clothes. "Maybe it's time to think about retiring, Daddy? James says manual labor at your age." 3 weeks after that first dinner, James invited me to his office at Sterling Partners. The place screamed money, all glass, chrome, and modern art that looked like expensive accidents. His corner office had a view of the city I'd helped build, one house at a time. "Robert," he said, sitting behind his massive desk, "I want to discuss some investment opportunities. With your construction experience and my financial connections." He laid out a plan involving property flipping, high-risk investments, and what sounded like creative accounting. When I hesitated, his smile turned slightly cold. "Of course, I understand if this is too sophisticated for your experience level. Sarah mentioned you prefer to keep things simple." That evening, I found an old photo album in my closet. There was Sarah at 16, proudly wearing my old work jacket on career day at school. "I want to build things like Daddy," she had told her class. Now, just 6 years later, she was letting James remake her into someone I barely recognized. My phone buzzed with a text from her. "James thinks we should have dinner at La Maison next week. He says it's more appropriate for business discussions than home cooking." I stared at those words, more appropriate, and remembered how Maria and I used to share sandwiches on construction sites, planning our future between bites. A chill ran down my spine as I realized something that would soon prove devastatingly true. James Anderson wasn't just dating my daughter, he was systematically dismantling everything we used to be. The first incident happened at Sarah's birthday dinner in April. I had made reservations at Romano's, the family-owned Italian restaurant where we'd celebrated every special occasion since she was little. But when I arrived, Sarah and James were standing outside, looking uncomfortable. "Oh, Daddy," Sarah said, not quite meeting my eyes, "James made reservations at LeBlanc instead. It's this amazing French place downtown. We thought, well, you might not be comfortable there." I watched them climb into James's Mercedes, leaving my wrapped gift, a handmade jewelry box I'd spent weeks crafting, sitting awkwardly on the passenger seat of my truck. At Le Blanc, James ordered in perfect French while I stumbled over the menu. Sarah kept shooting worried glances at my work boots under the table. I told myself they were just trying to share their world with me, even as I felt myself shrinking smaller with each corrected pronunciation. The second time cut deeper. I was at one of my construction sites on a Wednesday morning when Sarah called, her voice excited. "Daddy, we're looking at houses in River Heights. James found this perfect place. Could you come give it a professional opinion?" I left work immediately, driving across town to the wealthy neighborhood where houses looked like small castles. But when I arrived, James's real estate agent friend took one look at my dusty work clothes and tool belt and stepped between me and the front door. "Sir, this is a private showing." James appeared in the doorway, his smile tight. "Robert, we weren't expecting you so immediately. Perhaps you could come back when you're more appropriately dressed." Sarah stood behind him, silent as I drove away. Later, she texted, "James says first impressions matter with the seller. You understand, right?" I replied that I did, even as my hands shook remembering how many houses like that I had built with these supposedly embarrassing hands. The final straw came during a Sunday brunch at their favorite country club. James was telling his friends about their wedding plans, a destination ceremony at some exclusive resort. I sat quietly until he mentioned the budget. $420,000 for the house, he said casually, plus about $200,000 for the wedding. Robert here is generously handling it all. Aren't we lucky to have such a devoted father? The way his friends smiled at me, like I was some simple ATM machine, made my coffee taste bitter. Sarah jumped in quickly, "Daddy's always taken care of me." But her tone made it sound like an obligation rather than love. I excused myself to the restroom, where I stood gripping the marble sink, remembering how Maria and I had celebrated our wedding in my parents' backyard, rich in nothing but happiness. That night, alone in my quiet house, I looked at recent photos of Sarah on social media. Each one showed her transforming designer clothes, sophisticated poses, always on James's arm at expensive venues. The comments under each picture were telling, "You too are goals. Living the dream. Such an upgrade from your old life." My daughter, who once helped me lay foundations in the summer heat, was now someone who looked uncomfortable in her childhood home. The last photo showed them at a charity gala, Sarah in a gown that cost more than my first truck. The caption read, "Sometimes you have to leave the past behind to build a better future." I touched my screen, tracing the face of the little girl who used to fall asleep on my lap while I read construction manuals. She was still there, somewhere behind the designer makeup and practice smile, but James was building a wall between us, brick by brick, and I was running out of ways to reach her. Sarah called me on a sunny morning in May, her voice bubbling with excitement that reminded me of her childhood days. "Daddy, James proposed. We're getting married in August." For a moment, all my worries melted away. My little girl was getting married. I sat down in my workshop, surrounded by the smell of fresh sawdust and new lumber, letting happy tears fall freely. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Tell me everything." She described the perfect proposal at sunset on a yacht, the massive diamond ring, and their dreams of a destination wedding at the Royal Palm Resort. When she mentioned the wedding budget, $200,000, I didn't hesitate. "I'll take care of everything, princess. And I've been saving to help with your first house too. $420,000, all yours to start your new life." I could hear her happy squeal, so much like the little girl who used to run to show me her report cards. For that moment, I felt like her hero again. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of wedding planning. Sarah and James hired the best wedding planner in the city, a sharp-dressed woman named Victoria who spoke about table settings like they were matters of national security. I attended the first few planning meetings, sitting quietly while they discussed flowers that cost more than my monthly mortgage and ice sculptures that would melt before dinner was served. Each time I offered a suggestion, maybe using local flowers or holding the ceremony in the beautiful city botanical gardens, James would exchange a look with Victoria, and Sarah would quickly change the subject. But I told myself it was their day. I just wanted them to be happy. Then came the evening that changed everything. I had stopped by their house to drop off the first installment check for the wedding planner. It was growing dark, but I saw lights on inside in James's car in the driveway. As I approached the front door, I heard voices through the partially open window. "Your father is so provincial," James was saying, his tone dripping with amusement. "Did you see his face when Victoria mentioned the caviar bar? Like a farmer at an opera." Sarah's laugh, a sound that used to mean pure joy, now held a note of cruel agreement. "I know it's embarrassing. But we need him to pay for everything. Once we have the house and the wedding's done, we can start distancing ourselves. Move to a better city, maybe? Somewhere more sophisticated. My hands went numb. The check in my pocket felt like it was burning through my shirt. I stood there in the growing darkness, listening to my daughter and her fiancé plan their escape from my embarrassing presence. James continued, "The resort wedding was brilliant, by the way. He'll feel so out of place he probably won't stay long. Can you imagine him trying to mingle with my banking colleagues? In his work boots." More laughter. "Just make sure he signs the house check before the wedding," James added. "After that, he can go back to his little construction projects and we can start our real life." I backed away silently, the way I'd learned to move carefully on precarious scaffolding, and drove home in a daze. That night, I sat in my workshop until dawn, staring at the wedding gift I'd been building, a hand-carved hope chest made from oak, the same wood I'd used for Sarah's dollhouse all those years ago. Inside, I'd planned to put the house check, the wedding payments, and a letter telling her how proud her mother would be. Now, every chisel mark and carved detail seemed to mock me. But still I hoped. Maybe I'd misunderstood. Maybe they were just nervous about the wedding. Maybe my Sarah, my real Sarah, was still in there somewhere. The morning of the wedding arrived with perfect blue skies. I stood in front of my mirror, adjusting the new tie I'd bought specially for this day. The check for their dream house was in my jacket pocket, freshly printed from the bank. In a few hours, I would watch my only child say her vows in front of 300 guests at the Royal Palm Resort. "Today will be different," I whispered to Maria's picture on my dresser. "Today our little girl will remember who she really is." I didn't know then that before the sun set, I would learn the hardest lesson of my life. Sometimes the people we raise with love learn to use that love as a weapon against us. The Royal Palm Resort ballroom glittered like something from a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers caught the late afternoon sun, casting rainbow patterns across white silk tablecloths and golden charger plates that cost more than I made in a week. The air smelled of roses and expensive perfume. 300 guests filled the space, dressed in designer suits and flowing gowns that probably cost more than my first car. I sat quietly at my assigned table, not at the main family table but 3 rows back, next to distant cousins I barely knew. The wedding ceremony had been picture perfect. Sarah looked like an angel in her white designer dress, though she had barely glanced at me as I walked her down the aisle. My hands still trembled from writing that house check this morning, $420,000, almost every penny I had saved over 40 years of building other people's dreams. It sat in my jacket pocket, waiting for the right moment to give it to them. The moment I hoped would bring my daughter back to me. The reception was in full swing when James stood up, tapping his crystal champagne glass with a silver spoon. The sound rang through the ballroom like a bell, calling everyone to attention. "Friends, family, distinguished guests," he began, his voice smooth as silk, "I want to thank you all for being here on this special day." Standard speech, standard smiles. But then he paused and something shifted in his expression. "And I especially want to thank someone very special." He turned towards my table and my heart lifted for a moment. Robert Wilson, everyone. Sarah's father. The man who paid for all of this. A spotlight suddenly found me, harsh and bright. I squinted, raising my hand in an awkward wave as scattered applause filled the room. But James wasn't finished. He walked over to my table, microphone in hand, that same cold smile playing on his lips. "You know, it's amazing what some people will do to feel important," he continued, his voice taking on a mocking tone. "Our dear Robert here, this simple contractor, emptied his life savings to buy our approval. $200,000 for this wedding. $420,000 for a house. All because he's so desperate to pretend he belongs in our world." The ballroom went silent. Then someone snickered. Another person coughed to hide a laugh. James's smile grew wider. I mean, look at him. The work boots he tried to hide under designer pants. The calloused hands holding a crystal glass. A man who builds houses for other people, trying to buy his way into a world that will never accept him. More laughter now, spreading like ripples in a poison pond. I turned to Sarah, sitting at the head table in her perfect white dress. Surely she would stop this. Surely she would defend her father. But my daughter, my only child, the little girl I had raised alone, was laughing too. Her hand covered her mouth, but her shoulders shook with amusement. The spotlight felt like it was burning through my skin. James delivered his final blow. To Robert Wilson, everyone. The desperate old man who thought money could buy class. The room erupted in laughter. Full, uninhibited laughter. I saw phones recording, faces grinning, heads shaking in amused disbelief. With slow, deliberate movements I stood up. The check in my pocket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Without a word, I turned and walked towards the exit. Each step echoed in my ears, marking time with the continued laughter behind me. As I reached the doorway, I heard Sarah's voice finally calling out, "Daddy, wait." The house check. I kept walking. Through the lobby's marble floors, past the valets who had parked my old truck between shiny luxury cars, into the cool evening air that suddenly felt like freedom. Sitting in my truck, I could still hear the faint music and laughter from the ballroom. I looked at the check in my hand, at the numbers that represented 40 years of hard work. Then I looked back at the resort, at the window where I could see my daughter accepting congratulations, not sparing a glance for the empty table where her father had sat. In that moment, something inside me changed. Not broke, no, breaking implies weakness. This was more like concrete setting, like a foundation hardening into unbreakable strength. The father who would do anything for his daughter's love died in that truck. In his place sat a man who finally understood. Sometimes the truest act of love is letting go of those who treat it like trash. I started my truck and drove away from the Royal Palm Resort, leaving behind not just a wedding, but a lifetime of making excuses for people who had none for me. I drove home in complete silence, not even the radio for company. The house was dark when I arrived, the porch light casting shadows that seemed to mock the emptiness inside. I didn't bother turning on the lights. Instead, I walked straight to my workshop, where the half-finished hope chest sat like a monument to wasted love. My fingers traced the oak patterns I'd carved roses, just like the one Sarah had carried today. With sudden fury, I grabbed my tools and began removing the false bottom I'd built to hide their house check. The wood splintered under my shaking hands and something else fell out. An envelope I'd forgotten was there. It was yellowed with age, Maria's handwriting on the front. "For Robert, open when Sarah is ready to marry." The paper felt fragile in my rough hands, like a butterfly's wing. Inside was a letter written in my wife's careful script, and something else, a deed. Not just any deed, but the original property deed to the Royal Palm Resort. My legs went weak as memories flooded back. 25 years ago, when Wilson Construction was just starting, I'd taken a contract to build the resort's original foundation. The owner, old Mr. Thompson, couldn't pay the full amount in cash. Instead, he offered a 10% ownership stake in the property. "This place will be worth millions someday," he'd said. Maria had insisted we accept it, her nurse's intuition seeing the value I'd missed. We'd filed the deed away, nearly forgetting about it as the resort grew into the city's most exclusive venue. I unfolded Maria's letter with trembling fingers. "My dearest Robert, if you're reading this, our Sarah is getting married. I hope she's grown into the kind woman we dreamed she'd be. But if not, if she's forgotten the value of honest work and true love, then use this deed to remind her. The resort now makes millions each year. Your 10% ownership means you have power, real power, over the place where the wealthy play at being important. Use it wisely, my love. Sometimes children need to lose everything to remember what really matters." I spread the deed out on my workbench, studying it under the single light bulb. The legal language was clear. I owned 10% of the Royal Palm Resort, which now brought in roughly $20 million annually. $2 million a year, all these years could have been mine. But I'd chosen to stay humble, to teach Sarah the value of hard work instead. Now, that same document gave me control over the very place where they had humiliated me. One call to my lawyer could start proceedings to claim decades of back payments. One signature could force a sale of my shares, throwing their elite paradise into chaos. My hands stopped shaking. The numbness in my chest crystallized into something harder, colder, more purposeful. I pulled out my phone, which now showed 50 missed calls, Sarah and James, probably realizing the house check wasn't coming. I ignored them all and dialed my old friend Tom, now one of the city's top real estate lawyers. "Tom," I said, my voice steady for the first time since leaving the wedding, "remember when you said I should claim my stake in the Royal Palm? I'm ready. And I want to do it in a way that hurts." There was a pause on the line. "Robert," Tom replied, "after what they did to you tonight, and yes, word travels fast, I'll take this case for free. Come to my office first thing tomorrow." I carefully folded the deed and placed it in my wallet. Outside, the night had grown cold, but I felt only warmth, the heat of purpose, of power finally unleashed. The deed was just paper and ink, yellowed by time and forgotten by almost everyone. But in my hands, it was about to become something else entirely. A wrecking ball ready to demolish the carefully constructed world of those who thought they could laugh at a builder of foundations. Tom's law office occupied the entire top floor of a building I'd helped renovate 20 years ago. I arrived just as the sun was rising, the deed secure in my leather portfolio. The morning air felt different somehow, clearer, like the calm before a controlled demolition. Tom was already waiting, silver hair neat despite the early hour, reading glasses perched on his nose. He'd been my friend since our college days when he studied law and I studied architecture. 2 coffee cups sat on his massive oak desk, strong and black, the way we'd always drunk it on construction sites when he was just starting his practice and I was his only client. "Show me this nuclear weapon of yours," he said without preamble. I carefully laid out the deed, watching his eyes widen as he read. The morning light streaming through his window illuminated the official stamps, the signatures, the clear language that gave me 10% ownership of the Royal Palm Resort. Tom let out a low whistle, reaching for his calculator. "Robert, do you realize what this means? The resort's current value is approximately $200 million. Your share is worth $20 million. Plus, they owe you 20 years of back profits, roughly $40 million. That's more than enough to bankrupt them." He spread other documents across his desk, profit statements, tax records, ownership certificates. "The current managing partners, the Thompson family, they've been operating without consulting you, without paying your dividends. That's illegal. We can demand immediate payment, force an audit, even push for a sale of the entire property." Each word felt like a hammer hitting a nail, driving home the reality of my power. Tom leaned back in his chair, a predatory smile crossing his face. "And here's the beautiful part, your new son-in-law, James Anderson? His investment firm handles all the resort's finances. When this hits, he'll be professionally ruined. No one trusts a financial advisor who misses a $60 million liability." The coffee in my cup had grown cold, but I felt only warmth as Tom outlined our strategy. First, we would file notice of my ownership claim, freezing any major financial decisions at the resort. Then we would demand an emergency board meeting, where I would reveal my intentions to claim my back profits immediately. "The timing is perfect," Tom explained, pulling up a calendar. "They're fully booked for wedding season. Dozens of wealthy clients, millions in deposits. When we file this claim, their entire operation will screech to a halt." The plan crystallized with each passing minute. We would give them 2 choices, either buy me out for the full amount $60 million, or face a forced sale of the entire property. Either way, the exclusive Royal Palm Resort would cease to exist as they knew it. "The real estate vultures will circle immediately," Tom said, his voice holding a note of satisfaction. "That prime location, the existing structures, developers will tear it down and build luxury condos. No more wedding venue, no more elite social club. Just another construction site." He paused, studying my face. "And James? His clients will run when they realize he failed to discover this massive liability. His career in high finance will be over. He'll be lucky to get a job managing a small-town bank." I thought of James's mocking voice over the microphone, of Sarah's laughing agreement, of 300 people treating my life's work like a joke. "Do it," I said quietly. "File everything first thing Monday morning." Tom gathered the documents, placing them carefully in his safe. "Robert," he said, his tone serious now, "I've known you for 40 years. I've watched you build things with honesty and hard work. What they did to you at that wedding, that wasn't just cruel. It was a rejection of every value you stand for. This isn't just revenge, it's justice." I stood by his window, looking out over the city skyline I'd helped create, one building at a time. Below, I could see the Royal Palm's distinctive roofline, its manicured gardens where the wealthy held their perfect parties. Soon, those gardens would be filled with construction equipment, those perfect parties replaced by the sound of demolition. I felt no sadness, no hesitation, only the absolute certainty of a master craftsman who knows exactly which support beam to remove to bring down an entire structure. "You know what the difference is between them and us, Tom?" I said, my voice steady. "They think power comes from who you know, from where you vacation, from how much you can spend. But real power? Real power comes from building something solid, something that lasts. And now they're about to learn what happens when you mock the man who understands foundations." Monday morning arrived with the quiet certainty of a well-planned demolition. At exactly 9 o'clock, Tom's office sent simultaneous legal notices to 3 destinations: the Royal Palm Resort's management board, James's investment firm, and the city's property registration office. I sat in my workshop, running my hands over smooth lumber while imagining the chaos unfolding across town. The first call came at 9:15, James's number flashing on my phone like a warning light. I let it ring. 9:20 brought a text from Sarah. "Daddy, what's going on? James just got some crazy legal papers. Please call immediately." I continued sanding the oak beneath my hands, enjoying the familiar rhythm. At 9:45, my phone exploded with notifications. The Royal Palms managing partner had received the ownership claim. James's firm was in emergency meetings. Sarah was calling every 5 minutes now, her messages becoming increasingly desperate. But I remained as silent as they had been after the wedding, focusing instead on the local business news website open on my laptop. There it was, the first ripple of our earthquake. Royal Palm Resort faces ownership crisis. Undisclosed 10% stake threatens elite venue's future. The true panic hit around 11 o'clock. Tom called, his voice holding barely contained satisfaction. "Robert, you should see them. James and his entire legal team just rushed into my office. He's white as a sheet. Turns out he personally signed off on the resort's financial documents last year, certifying there were no undisclosed ownership stakes. His professional insurance won't cover this level of oversight." I could hear the chaos in the background, raised voices, papers shuffling, the sound of careers imploding. "They're offering $2 million to settle quietly," Tom continued. I just laughed and showed them the profit statements. $60 million or forced sale, those are the only options. Shortly after noon, Sarah and James appeared at my front gate. I watched through my workshop window as they stood in the summer heat, looking desperately at my quiet house. Sarah was crying, her perfect makeup running. James's expensive suit was wrinkled, his polished facade cracking. I didn't answer their knocks. Let them feel what it's like to be ignored, to be treated as invisible. By 3 in the afternoon, the story had hit every major news outlet in the city. Exclusive resort's future in doubt. Financial advisor faces investigation for missing $60 million liability. Society weddings in jeopardy as Royal Palm faces legal crisis. I received calls from 5 different news stations, all wanting the story of the humble contractor about to bring down the city's most exclusive venue. I declined them all. Real power doesn't need to shout, it whispers through legal documents and calculated silence. At 4:30, Tom sent me a video clip from his office's security camera. James was standing in the lobby, begging the receptionist for another meeting. "Please, you don't understand. This will ruin me. My clients are already pulling their accounts." Behind him, Sarah clutched her designer handbag like a shield, her face showing the first real emotion I'd seen from her in months, pure, unadulterated fear. As evening settled over the city, my phone showed 123 missed calls. Voice messages filled my inbox, each one more desperate than the last. "Daddy, please, we can explain. Mr. Wilson, let's discuss this reasonably. Robert, this is the resort's manager, we can work something out." I sat on my back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of victory. Tomorrow the real negotiations would begin. Tomorrow they would understand the full cost of mocking honest work and simple dignity. But tonight? Tonight I enjoyed the silence, broken only by the gentle sound of my phone vibrating with their mounting desperation. I thought about Sarah's laughter at the wedding, about James's sneering voice over the microphone. Now they were learning what every builder knows. It takes months to construct something properly, but only moments to bring it all crashing down, especially when you know exactly where the weakest point is. The morning after our legal bombshell dropped, I packed a single suitcase with simple clothes and my most basic tools. The chaos in the city was growing. Tom had texted that news vans were parked outside the Royal Palm, filming wealthy clients rushing to cancel their events. James's investment firm had suspended him pending investigation. Sarah had apparently spent the night in her car outside my gate, finally leaving when she realized I wouldn't appear. But I was done watching their world crumble. I had set the demolition charges. Now it was time to step back and let gravity do its work. I left a note taped to my front door, written in the same steady hand that had drawn building plans for 40 years. "Gone fishing. Tom has full authority to handle everything. Don't bother looking for me." It wasn't entirely a lie. I was heading to Cedar Lake, a quiet spot 300 miles north where Maria and I had spent our honeymoon in a tiny cabin by the water. The same cabin that, unknown to Sarah, I had bought 15 years ago as my retirement escape. The drive north felt like shedding a heavy coat in springtime. Each mile marker took me further from designer suits and crystal champagne flutes, closer to a world where worth was measured in honest calluses and straight-cut lumber. I stopped at small-town diners where coffee came in thick ceramic mugs and nobody cared what brand your shoes were. The radio stayed off. I had no interest in hearing about the social earthquake I'd triggered back home. By sunset, I was turning onto the familiar dirt road that led to my cabin. The air smelled of pine needles and lake water, exactly as it had when Maria and I first discovered this place. The cabin stood just as I'd left it on my last visit, weathered wood siding, small porch with 2 rocking chairs, tin roof that sang in the rain. Inside was everything a builder really needs: a solid bed, a sturdy table, a workshop corner with well-worn tools. No crystal chandeliers, no marble floors, just honest materials and craftsmanship that would outlast any fashion. That first night, I sat on the porch watching stars emerge over the lake. My phone, switched off and stored in a drawer, couldn't reach me here anyway. The nearest cell tower was 20 miles away. Instead of digital chimes and vibrations, I listened to bullfrogs and crickets, nature's symphony that asked nothing of anyone. In my workshop corner, I unpacked my favorite carving tools. There was a piece of cedar I'd been saving, perfect for the small projects that had always brought me peace. No grand designs, no expensive materials, just the quiet conversation between skilled hands and willing wood. I slept better that night than I had in months, lulled by the gentle lap of waves against the shore and the absolute certainty that I had finally built something unshakable, my own independence. Days began taking on a simple rhythm. Up at dawn to fish from my small dock, mornings spent carving or repairing things around the cabin, afternoons walking the quiet trails that Maria and I had once explored. The local general store provided everything I needed, run by people who cared more about the firmness of your handshake than the size of your bank account. Sometimes I'd help neighbors with small projects, fixing a sagging porch, replacing worn shingles, asking only a hot meal in return. This was wealth that James and his kind would never understand. The richness of being needed for your skills, not your checkbook. A week into my stay, I borrowed the store's ancient computer to check my email just once. Tom had sent a single line: everything proceeding as planned. They're desperate. Take your time. I logged off without replying and walked back to my cabin in the golden afternoon light, smiling at the thought of James and Sarah scrambling to save their crystal palace while I sat in my wooden castle, surrounded by the kind of peace that money couldn't buy and mockery couldn't touch. After 3 weeks of peaceful exile at Cedar Lake, I finally drove into the small town to check my messages at the general store. Old Bill, the owner, had been holding a thick envelope from Tom. Inside was a newspaper clipping from back home, and as I read it at Bill's wooden counter, the taste of justice was sweeter than the coffee he poured me. The Royal Palm Resort was in complete meltdown. 17 major weddings had canceled, demanding their deposits back. The Thompson family, facing the prospect of paying me $60 million or losing everything in a forced sale, had fired their entire management team. But the real earthquake was happening in James's world. His investment firm had terminated him after discovering he'd missed my ownership stake during his audit. The state financial board was investigating him for negligence. His professional reputation, built on perfectly pressed suits and false confidence, had crumbled like poorly mixed concrete. Tom's detailed letter painted an even more satisfying picture. Sarah and James had moved out of their luxury apartment, unable to afford the rent without his salary. They were living in a small studio on the wrong side of town, the kind of place James used to mock others for calling home. Their dream house was gone. The sellers had kept their deposit when the main payment didn't arrive. But the real karma was in their relationship. Tom had heard from his social contacts that Sarah and James were fighting constantly. She blamed him for antagonizing me at the wedding. He blamed her for not knowing about my resort ownership. Their perfect social media facade had cracked. Sarah's last Instagram post, usually full of designer labels and expensive venues, was 3 weeks old. The comments section was brutal. What happened to all that class you were bragging about? Guess money can't buy everything. Karma comes for the cruel. More details spilled from the pages like sweet rain. James had tried getting jobs at other investment firms, but news of his $60 million oversight had spread through the financial community like wildfire. No one would risk hiring him. He was now working as a junior clerk at a small suburban bank, wearing off-the-rack suits and processing car loans for the kind of people he used to look down on. Sarah had lost her marketing job when her company discovered her connection to the Royal Palm scandal. Their wealthy friends, the ones who had laughed at my work boots, now ignored their calls. They were experiencing what every builder knows. When a foundation is built on lies, the whole structure eventually collapses. The Royal Palm's managing partners were desperately trying to find buyers for the property, but my ownership claim had scared away serious investors. Tom wrote that they were considering turning it into a mid-range hotel chain location, the ultimate humiliation for a place that once hosted only elite events. The last page of Tom's letter contained a transcript of a voicemail Sarah had left at his office. Her voice, once so confident, now trembled. "Please, Mr. Harrison. We know Daddy's with you or you know where he is. Everything's falling apart. James lost his job. We had to sell my engagement ring. Nobody will hire us. The wedding venue is suing us for breach of contract. We're drowning. Just tell Daddy we're sorry. Tell him we'll do anything. Anything. As I folded the letter, Bill refilled my coffee cup. Bad news? He asked, noting my expression. I smiled, watching the rain start to fall outside his store window. No, Bill. Just learning that sometimes the best revenge is letting people build their own prison. Just then his ancient store phone rang. Bill answered, listened, then held out the receiver. For you, Robert. Woman crying, says she's your daughter. I stood up, leaving my coffee half finished. Tell her I'm still gone fishing, Bill. Some people need to learn how it feels to be treated like they don't exist. Tom's message finally convinced me to return. They're camping outside my office every day, Robert. Sarah's lost 20 pounds. James looks like he hasn't slept in weeks. Maybe it's time to hear them out. I agreed to meet at Carson's Diner, a simple truck stop restaurant where I used to take Sarah for chocolate milkshakes when she was little. The kind of place James would have sneered at a month ago. I arrived early, settling into a worn vinyl booth by the window. The morning sun filtered through coffee-stained curtains, the smell of bacon and fresh bread filling the air. This was my world, honest food, working people, no pretense. At exactly 9 o'clock they walked in. The change in them was shocking. Sarah wore no makeup, her designer clothes replaced by a simple department store dress that hung loose on her thin frame. James's expensive suit was gone. Instead, he wore khakis and a wrinkled button-down shirt from his new bank job. They looked smaller somehow, as if their arrogance had been a physical thing that had deflated, leaving behind hollow shells. They slid into the booth across from me, neither able to meet my eyes. Our waitress, an older woman named Betty who'd served me breakfast for 20 years, brought coffee without being asked. Sarah's hands shook as she reached for her cup, her wedding ring noticeably absent. James looked like he'd aged a decade, dark circles under his eyes, his carefully styled hair now showing patches of gray. Thank you for meeting us, Sarah whispered, her voice rough from crying. Daddy, She choked on the words. James tried to take over, his former smooth confidence replaced by genuine trembling. Mr. Wilson, we've lost everything. My career is over. No investment firm will touch me. The bank job barely covers our rent. We're being sued by 3 different wedding couples who lost their deposits at the Royal Palm. Sarah can't even get interviews once people Google our names. He paused, swallowing hard. But that's not why we're here. We're here because we were cruel. Incredibly, unforgivably cruel. Sarah found her voice, tears rolling down her hollow cheeks. I forgot who I was, Daddy. Who you raised me to be. Every time I walk past a construction site now, I remember how you taught me to read blueprints. How proud I was when you let me help measure lumber. James's fancy friends, their expensive parties, none of them ever built anything real. But you built homes where families live. Buildings that will stand for generations. Her words caught on a sob. And I laughed at you. I laughed while the man I married mocked everything you stand for. Mom would be so ashamed of me. The mention of Maria hit me hard, but I kept my face neutral, letting them continue. James leaned forward, his designer watch replaced by a cheap digital model. I was wrong about everything. These past weeks working at the small bank, I've met people like you. Hardworking people who create real value. They're worth 10 of my former colleagues. I understand now why you let me destroy myself. I deserved it. Betty brought plates of eggs and toast that neither of them touched. Sarah pulled an envelope from her purse, hands trembling. We found this in our storage unit. Mom's old recipe box. Inside was a letter she wrote to me to be opened on my wedding day. I never looked for it before the wedding. I was too busy with designer dresses and expensive flowers. She slid the unopened envelope across the table. She knew, didn't she? She knew I might lose my way. That's why you kept the resort ownership quiet all these years. You were waiting to see if I'd remember my roots. I picked up Maria's letter, feeling the weight of my wife's wisdom. Your mother believed that true character shows itself when people think they're above consequences, I said quietly, my first words since they'd arrived. She wanted you to learn that lesson one way or another. Sarah reached across the table, trying to take my hand. Daddy, please. We'll do anything to make this right. Anything to be part of your life again. Just tell us what you need us to do. I looked at my daughter's desperate face, at James's humbled expression. Through the diner window, I could see my old truck parked next to their used Toyota. No more Mercedes, no more status symbols. Just 2 broken people learning the hardest lesson of all. That respect, once lost, must be rebuilt as carefully as any foundation. Betty appeared with the coffee pot, giving me a knowing look. She'd seen plenty of family drama in her 40 years of serving truckers and workers. "More coffee while you think it over, Robert?" she asked. I nodded, watching the dark liquid fill my cup, taking my time before delivering the terms of their reconstruction. I took a slow sip of coffee, letting the familiar warmth steady my thoughts. "Here's how this works," I finally said, my voice calm but firm, like explaining load-bearing walls to a new contractor. "First, understand that forgiveness isn't guaranteed. It's like a house, it has to be built slowly, carefully, with the right materials. You don't get to rush the process." Sarah and James nodded, hanging on every word. "Starting today, you live within your means. No more loans, no more pretending to be something you're not. James, you keep that bank job. Learn what it means to help regular people manage their honest savings. Sarah, you start from the bottom in whatever job you can find. No more expecting your name or connections to open doors." I paused, watching their expressions. The old James would have protested. This new, humbled version just nodded, understanding that these weren't suggestions but foundations being laid. "Sunday dinners will be at my house, once a month to start. You'll eat what I cook, sit at my old table, and learn to appreciate simple things again. No phones, no social media posts, no performing for an audience. Just family trying to remember what that word means." The next part was harder but necessary. "About money, I'm not bailing you out of your legal troubles. You'll face those consequences on your own. The wedding venue lawsuits, the credit card debt, the apartment lease, those are your lessons to learn. Live in a small place. Drive old cars. Pack lunches for work. Let every dollar remind you that honest work matters more than expensive appearances." Sarah wiped tears with a paper napkin, no designer handkerchief in sight. "The Royal Palm situation is non-negotiable. I'm selling my stake but not to save the resort. The new owners will probably turn it into a regular hotel, a place where normal people can make their own happy memories without being judged for their work boots or calloused hands." James flinched at that, remembering his cruel words at the wedding. "Most importantly," I continued, "you need to understand that trust, once broken, doesn't get fixed with words. I don't want apologies. I want actions. Show me who you are through what you do, not what you say." I laid out more specific terms. They would help with projects at my workshop, learning the value of creating things with their own hands. They would volunteer at the community center where Maria used to teach night classes, understanding what real service means. Every wedding anniversary, instead of celebrating at expensive restaurants, they would spend the day helping me build something for a family in need. "Your marriage needs a new foundation," I explained. "One based on giving, not taking." The final condition was the hardest for them to hear. "For 1 year, you don't tell anyone I'm your father. No using my name, no trying to rebuild your social status through my reputation. You introduce yourselves simply as James and Sarah, nothing more. Let people judge you for who you are, not whose daughter or son-in-law you are." Sarah's hands trembled around her coffee cup. "But Daddy, you're the only thing we have left to be proud of." I shook my head. "That's exactly the problem. Pride has to be earned, not borrowed." They sat in silence, absorbing the weight of these requirements. Finally, James spoke, his voice carrying none of its old smoothness. "Mr. Wilson, these terms, they're more generous than we deserve. You're offering us a path back, even if it's a hard one. We accept. All of it." Sarah reached for his hand, squeezing it. "We'll prove ourselves, Daddy. Not with designer clothes or fancy parties, but with honest work and real change." I stood up, leaving money on the table for Betty. "One more thing," I said, pausing by their booth. "That cabin at Cedar Lake where your mother and I honeymooned, that's where I've been all these weeks. It's a simple place, no marble counters, no crystal lights. But it's real. In 6 months, if you've shown true change, I'll take you there. Let you see what genuine peace looks like." They nodded, understanding that this wasn't just an invitation to a cabin. It was an invitation to rebuild themselves, one honest day at a time. 1 year after that meeting at Carson's Diner, I stood in my workshop on Christmas Eve, watching Sarah and James unload their used Toyota in the snow. They carried simple wrapped packages, handmade gifts, I knew because that was part of our new tradition. Sarah had learned woodworking over the past year, spending weekends in my workshop making picture frames and small boxes. James, his hands now calloused from volunteer construction work, had built a rocking chair for the front porch. They looked different, not just their modest clothes or Sarah's unstyled hair, but something deeper in their eyes. A humility that had replaced the old arrogance. Through my window, I watched James pause to help my elderly neighbor shovel her walkway without being asked. Sarah arranged her homemade cookies on the plain ceramic plates she'd learned to love, not a crystal dish in sight. The past 12 months had tested them exactly as I'd intended. They'd lived in their small apartment, worked their modest jobs, faced their consequences without complaint. Every Sunday dinner, they'd sat at my scarred wooden table, learning to find joy in simple meatloaf and honest conversation. Inside, the house smelled of pine from the Christmas tree we'd cut ourselves last weekend. No designer decorations this year, just handmade ornaments and strings of popcorn Sarah had patiently threaded while telling me about her new job as a receptionist at a local construction company. She'd started in the filing room, earning respect through hard work rather than her last name. James had surprised everyone by discovering a genuine talent for helping working-class families at his small bank. Last month, he'd been promoted to loan officer, taking special pride in helping first-time homebuyers understand their mortgages. They'd paid off their legal debts slowly but steadily, living on budget lunches and free community events. Not once had they asked me for money or tried to use my name for advantage. The Royal Palm was now a regular hotel, hosting proms and retirement parties instead of elite weddings. Sometimes, driving past it, I caught Sarah looking at the building with something like relief, as if the loss of that false world had freed her too. As they came up my front walk, arms full of humble gifts and homemade food, I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with my fireplace. They'd earned their way back, not through grand gestures or expensive apologies, but through small, consistent choices to be better people. Through learning to value the very things they once mocked. Through understanding that true worth isn't bought or borrowed, but built day by day with honest effort. Sarah's face lit up when she saw the old family photos I'd put out, including one of her mother in front of this house, paint on her cheeks from helping me finish the siding. James carefully set his handmade rocking chair next to my workbench, pride showing in his eyes not for its cost, but for the hours of effort it represented. As we gathered around my table that Christmas Eve, I studied their faces in the warm light and saw what Maria had always hoped for. Two people who had finally learned that the strongest foundations are built not with money or status, but with humility, hard work, and real love. Looking back now, 2 years after that cruel wedding night, I understand something that every builder learns. Sometimes the strongest structures rise from complete demolition. When James grabbed that microphone and mocked my life's work, when Sarah laughed along with 300 strangers, they thought they were destroying an old man's dignity. Instead, they destroyed their own false foundation, clearing the ground for something real to be built. Every day since then has been like laying a new brick, setting a stronger beam, creating a family structure based on honest work and true respect. The Royal Palm Resort, that temple of false luxury, is now a regular hotel where working families make real memories. James helps those same families secure honest mortgages, finding purpose in service rather than status. Sarah teaches weekend woodworking classes at the community center, showing others that creating something with your own hands brings a joy no designer label can match. They've learned what Maria and I always knew, that true wealth isn't measured in crystal glasses or marble floors, but in the strength of the bonds we build with those we love. If you're watching this and feeling invisible to the people you sacrificed everything for, if you're being judged for your work boots instead of your character, remember this. Dignity isn't given or taken, it's built, like any worthy structure, through unwavering commitment to what's right. Sometimes love means letting people fall so they can learn to build themselves back up. Sometimes the quietest revenge is simply standing firm in your truth, letting others crash against it until they understand their own weakness. My story isn't about money or power or even revenge. It's about the unshakable strength that comes from knowing your own worth. If this message speaks to your heart, hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of dignity winning over disrespect. Share in the comments where you're watching from and how you've stood strong against those who tried to shame your honest work. Because at the end of the day, we're all builders of something, whether it's houses, relationships, or our own character. And the only foundation worth building on is truth.